This is Kathy from Gadgets Top 321, and in today's video I'm going to be taking a look at Monteverde Yosemite Green. I'm going to be testing it at a variety of pins and nib sizes ranging from a Pilot Extra Fine to a 1.5 Stub Nib, and I'm going to be featuring my Kaweco Skyline Sport, which has an extra fine nib, and surprisingly, this extra fine nib corresponds pretty closely to a Pilot medium steel nib. So I'm going to be using it in place of the medium in today's writing sample. I'm going to start with the Pilot 78G with a extra fine nib. Now, I don't know if all of the inks advertise this, but a lot of the Monteverde inks advertise ITF, ink treatment formula, and I'm curious how something like that is going to affect the performance of an extra fine nib. Sometimes watery inks will cause the extra fine nib to be more scratchy, so I don't know if this is going to make this particular ink feel more scratchy or not. No, this feels pretty good. That was pretty smooth for an extra fine nib. You've still got that extra fine feedback, but no catching on the paper. Very pleasant. And I think it looks good too. It really stands out. Next, I've got my Pilot Pereira with a fine nib. Now this is pretty smooth, especially on this Tomoe River paper. Let me scoot my pins out of the way. That is very pleasant to write with. Alright, now I've got the Skyline Sport. And the reason I wanted to test the Skyline Sport with this ink is, number one, I just like using green inks, or really any colorful inks in this gray pen. And these little Kaweco nibs, this one and my Lilliput, have trouble with hard starts, and I've kind of sat here with the cap off. Let's see how this does. It's very wet, especially compared to the first two. Nice and smooth, look at that. Very pleasant to write with. Now the K was a little wispy there, but I think it was because I sat here with the cap off. Not bad. I mean, this Kaweco Sport, at times I've had trouble where it just won't write the first letter. I write the first letter and have to go back and write over it again. So that, to me, that's a success. All right, next I've got another Pilot Pereira. This one has a cursive medium nib, also known as the 1.0 Stub. I've got a little... I did notice when I was inking this one up, the ink really wanted to stick to this nib. Not really any of the others, just this one in particular, so I'm not sure what that means. This is nice and smooth. You see it's quite a bit drier than that Kaweco Sport, and I'm seeing that in the color also. The first three are more of a grassy green, and since this Pereira writes a little bit drier and it spreads the ink a little thinner, it's coming across more of a spearmint green, minty green. It looks nice. All right, next I have a Nemesis Singularity with a 0.6 stub nib. This ink is coming across nice and wet and very pleasant, feels very pleasant on the paper. The nib on the paper feels nice really in all the pens. All right, and finally I've got the 1.5 stub nib, and this is a Jinhao X750. All right, I'll give that a little time to dry while we look at the other paper, the writing samples on other papers. All right, in my little ARC notebook on the ARC paper, they all felt nice. The Pilot 78G maybe wasn't quite as smooth as the extra fine. Wasn't as smooth as on this paper, but you can see maybe it was a little bit drier, but it wasn't scratchy. It was very pleasant to write with, and it looks good. It really stands out. The jump from the extra fine to the fine, you could really feel it. This was a lot smoother. The Kaweco, I almost wrote Lilliput, but it was the Skyline Sport. You see, didn't have any trouble with any hard starts here, and it's nice and wet. It's very pleasant to write with. The Pilot Pereira, again, since it writes a little bit drier, the color of the ink is more of a minty green. And let me see. Now we get into the Stub Nibs. The Nemesis, I'm not really seeing any noticeable, no feathering. Now on the 1.5 stub, the edges start to look a little ragged, but the 0.6 stub looked good. Now I did notice on the 0.6, my downstrokes, the ink didn't hardly want to grab the paper, but that's really the only place I noticed that. That could have been just the angle I was holding it on the paper. All right. On Rhodia paper, just looked very nice. Everything looked kind of grassy green except for the drier writing Pereira. Again, looked more of a minty green. Those were, I like the way it looks and the way it felt writing in every nib. I liked it. On 20-pound copy paper, let's see. They all felt really good writing on the paper. You start to see a little feathering when you get into the widest stub. Now the Nemesis, it wasn't as pleasant to write on this paper just because the ink spread. It felt like you were writing with a magic marker. Let's see. Now this ink does want to bleed a little bit. Everything bled, even the extra fine wanted to bleed through just a little bit. The only one that didn't bleed through was the Pereira with the cursive medium. It's the one that, writes a little bit drier, but it was smooth. It was pleasant to write with. All right, and the Leuchtturm, the writing sample in the Leuchtturm. Looked really nice on this paper. There's some subtle shading, and you start to see a little, I don't know if you'll be able to see it here because of the lighting, but there's just the tiniest bit of a red halo, a red sheen, a halo of red sheen. It was nice. Now when I went to do my ink smear, it wrote a little bit dry there. It didn't want to grab the paper, but that's the only place I saw that. So again, that may have just been the angle I was holding it. But nice looking green. And finally, on the Tomoe River paper, let's see. Yeah, I'm seeing some nice red sheen on the Stub Nib, and just a little bit on the Nima sign. It's very subtle. On the Kaveco, since it wrote kind of wet, I'm seeing just the tiniest little bit of sheen. And then the two fine nibs are just a nice, consistent line of green ink. All right, performed very well. Was just pleasant to write with in every nib size. So I'm looking forward to trying some more of these Monteverde inks. I'll be looking for the ones that have the ink treatment formula. All right, if you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.